So my name is Ganesh Kadu, and it's a pleasure to introduce Professor Aparna Lakshmanan, who's currently the assistant professor at the Department of Mathematics of the Cochin University of Science and Technology, Cochin. Her area of interest is discrete mathematics and particularly graph theory. She's received her PhD from the University of Science and Cochin University of Science and Technology under the guidance of Professor Vijay Kumar Ambat in 2009. She has received various awards and honors, including the Kerala State Young Scientist Award instituted by Kerala State Council for Science and Technology in 2012. She's completed a UGC minor project in 2016. She's organized various conferences, workshops, and symposia, including the one that concluded recently, the International Conference on Graph Theory. So with these words, I welcome Professor Aparna Lakshmanan here. It's a pleasure to have you here in this refresher course. Over to you, Professor Aparna.
Thank you, Professor Ganesh, for that nice introduction. First of all, let me thank Professor Vinayak Joshi for inviting me to deliver 2 sessions on this refresher course in mathematics. And I also thank the entire organizing committee for organizing such a nice event. So the title of my presentation is Power Graph of a Group. I'll start from the very basic definition of graph theory, since I understand that graph theory is not a mandatory paper in all universities, and there is all possibility that there are someone who are not familiar with the basic concepts of graph theory. We'll just recall the basic definitions of group, and then we will slowly move on to the connection between graphs and groups, of course, which will lead towards the power graph of a group. So we'll start with the basic definition of a graph. Those who are familiar can just relax for 5 minutes. So a graph is basically an ordered pair, V, E, where V is a collection of points called vertices, and this must be non-empty. And E is a collection of curves which joins 2 points or 2 vertices, which can be possibly empty also. So when we write E equal to, say, set UV, or simply E equal to UV, we mean that E is an edge joining the vertices labeled U and V. And we say that U is adjacent to V in this case. If UV is an edge, we say that U is adjacent to V. Similar is the case for edges. If 2 edges E and F share a common end vertex, we say that the edges are adjacent to each other. And when E equal to UV, we say that E is incident on the vertices U and V. If we have an edge which starts and ends at the same vertex, such edges are called loops. So a loop is an edge which has same end vertex. Both end vertices are the same. Then come another type of edges called parallels. We say that 2 edges are parallel if their end vertices are the same. That is, there are more than 1 edges whose end vertices are the same. Here I have given an example in which 2 edges share common end vertices. It's not necessary that there are only 2. There can be more. There can be 3, 4, 5, any number of edges sharing the same set of end vertices. Such edges are called parallels or multiple edges. In a graph, if there are no loops and no multiple edges, then we call such graphs as simple graphs. Just to recall all those simple graphs, for n equal to 1, we can have only 1 graph. Say, I can have a vertex. Since n equal to 1 means Usually by n, we denote the number of vertices of a graph, which we call as order of that graph. So when n equal to 1, there is only one vertex. And since loops are not permitted, we can't draw any edge. So for n equal to 1, we have only one graph. When in n equal to 2, we have two different possibilities. I can either I can draw an edge, or I can just simply say that I don't want to draw any edges. That gives rise to two graphs. For n equal to 2, there are two graphs. When n equal to 3, similarly, we can argue and say that we have four different graph structures. And when n becomes 4, we get 11 graphs and so on. So here we have some standard graphs. The first one is obviously the complete graph. The complete graph is a graph in which every pair of vertices are made adjacent to each other. And such graphs are denoted by Kn, where n is the number of vertices. Another class of graphs is path. So here the vertex set will be, say, v1, v2, etc., vn. And we have a continuous sort of adjacency, which gives us something which looks like a road, which looks like a path from v1 to vn. So such graphs are called path graphs. The adjacency is precisely vi is adjacent to vi plus 1 for every I equal to 1, 2, etc. up to n minus 1. Okay, so here I have given P1, P2, P3, P4, and we can have graphs like that. Okay. Yes. Someone want to ask something, or is it by mistake? Okay. So another class is cycle graphs. Cycle graphs is nothing but the end vertices of the path are made adjacent to each other. Again, the vertex set is v1, v2, etc., vn. And vi is made adjacent to vi plus 1 for every I equal to 1, 2, etc., n. Where by vn plus 1, we mean v1 itself. That is, we are taking mod n, congruence with n, while considering the suffixes. So that gives me a cycle. And here I have given the picture of a C6. So these are some standard names and standard notations used for graphs. Path is denoted by Pn, path on n vertices is denoted by Pn, and cycle on n vertices is denoted by Cn. Usually this Pn is sometimes confusing because n denotes the number of vertices, and the number of edges in Pn will be n minus 1 only. So sometimes I have seen that some people mistake Pn plus 1 as Pn. That is a path on n edges. It is not like that. According to the standard notations, it is path on n vertices, which has n minus 1 edges. Moving to the concept of subgraphs. When we define a set, we have a subset. When we define a group, we have a subgroup. Vector space, again, sub is there, field, subfield is there, ring, subring is there. Everywhere it is there, and we know how to define it. Exactly in the same way we are defining subgraph of a graph. H is a subgraph of G if both the vertex set and edge set of H are subgraphs of vertex set of and edge set of G. And if vertex set of H is equal to vertex set of G, then such subgraphs are called spanning subgraphs. Now, there is another category of subgraphs called induced subgraphs. Here, all edges of G with n vertices in vertex set of H are compulsorily present in the graph H. If that is the case, we call such subgraphs as induced subgraphs. Here you have some examples. Here we have C3, which is same as K3. Complete graph on 3 vertices coincides with cycle on 3 vertices. So I have drawn a K3 or a C3 here. And all these 8 graphs are spanning subgraphs of C3. You can see that the entire vertex set is present in each of these graphs, but edge set varies. The graph itself is also a spanning subgraph of C3. And you can see that usually when we consider graphs on 3 vertices, the second, third, and fourth, these three drawings are not considered as distinct. We'll be dealing with the concept of isomorphism, then it will be more clear. But these three graphs are not considered as distinct. But when coming to spanning subgraphs, these graphs are different because these vertices are already fixed when we are taking G into account. And hence, these three graphs will be distinct when considered as spanning subgraphs of C3. And then comes induced subgraph. Here, you have a wheel minus one edge. If you want, you can call it like that, or a P4 joined to a central vertex. And here, you have an induced subgraph. This induced subgraphs can also be viewed as graphs obtained by deleting vertices. So what do you mean by deleting vertices or deleting edges? When we say delete an edge, that means simply delete that edge. Only that edge goes. No harm done for any other vertices, any other edges, or the vertex set. Only that edge goes when we say delete an edge. And when we say delete vertices, we mean that delete that vertex and delete all edges which are incident on that vertex, because without an edge, vertex can survive. But without n vertices, edges cannot survive. So deleting vertices means delete all edges which are incident on that vertex also comes into picture. So induced subgraphs are basically vertex deleted subgraphs, where the vertices which are deleted are precisely those present in Vg minus V of H. You take the difference, vertex set of G minus vertex set of H, and delete all those vertices. What you get is precisely the induced subgraph. So next we will move on to another basic definition in graph theory, complement of a graph. The complement of a graph G, denoted by G bar, which we call as G complement, is the graph with the same vertex set as that of G. And two vertices are made adjacent in G complement if and only if they are non-adjacent in G. So here you have an example. This graph was popularly, this is a graph on 5 vertices, and this is popularly known as house graph. And this comes as a forbidden subgraph of certain interesting classes of graphs, and there we name it as a house. Okay. And if you want to find the complement of this graph, the vertex set will be precisely the same. The same set of vertices will be drawn here, and an edge will be drawn between two vertices if they are non-adjacent in the original graph. Here you can see that these two vertices are non-adjacent, so we put an adjacency between them here, and like that. And if you have a close look, it is easy to see that the complement is nothing but P5. You start with this vertex. I assume that my pointer is visible to all of you. Okay, you start with this vertex, move towards this one. So V1, V2, then go to the central one on the top, V3, then come down towards the left, V4, and here we go for V5. So the complement of a house is nothing but a path drawn in a different shape.
Pointer is not visible, ma'am.
Sorry, pointer is not visible.
Hmm.
Oh, I'm sorry for that. Okay, I'll try to explain without using pointers. Okay,
Now it is visible, ma'am.
it's visible now.
Now, just before.
Same
Try
with-
once again, ma'am. Now visible.
Okay, just 1 second. I think that is due to the highlight pen that it has become invisible. Now it is visible.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes,
That-
ma'am.
Thank you.
Ah,
Thank you.
visible.
So we'll have some more basic definitions. The first one is a walk. A walk in a graph is an alternating sequence of vertices and edges which starts and terminates in a vertex. So we have to start with a vertex. We have to choose an edge which has this vertex as an end vertex. Move using that edge. You will definitely reach another vertex, the other end vertex, which can be the same as the first one. If the edge chosen is a loop, that doesn't matter. So you start with a vertex, move through an edge which has this particular vertex as an end vertex. Okay, go along and we will reach another vertex. Again, use another edge or the same edge itself, which has these as an end vertex, and go on like that. So we get an alternating sequence of vertices and edges. We start with a vertex, move through an edge, reaches another vertex, again moves through an edge, reaches another vertex, go on like that. At the end, we will reach some vertex. That's it. Okay. So it's an alternating sequence of vertices and edges, say V0, E1, V1, E2, V2, etc. such that EI has got n vertices, Vi minus 1 and Vi. That is the only restriction. Okay. So that is a walk. In a walk, if no two edges are repeated, we call it as a trail. That is, once if you have used an edge, you should not use that again. But vertices can, of course, be repeated. Edges are not repeated. Such a thing is called a trail. So trail is a special kind of a walk. And again, if vertices are also not repeated, what you get is a path. So one should not get confused with the path graph and path. Path graph means only this alternating sequence of vertices and edges are present in that graph. So such graphs are called path graphs, which we have just seen. And now what we see is a path. Path graph is of course a path, but all paths are not path graphs. So again, path is an alternating sequence of vertices and edges in which no two vertices or edges are repeated. Now, length of a path means the number of edges present in that path, and distance between two vertices is the length of the shortest path. We'll just have a look with one example. So here you have a graph. I have named the vertices just for convenience, and I'm looking for say paths from the vertex 0 to the vertex 6. I have three different paths here. Either I can go from 0 to 4 and then to 6. So I have started from 0 and reached 6. So 0, 4, 6 is a path. Again, 0, 2, 5, 4, 6 is another path. 0, 1, 2, 5, 4, 6 is also a path. You can easily verify that these are the only paths from 0 to 6. And distance between 0 and 6 is the length of the shortest path. And this one, the first one is the shortest path. It contains 3 vertices, but 2 edges, only 2 edges. Distance is the number of edges present. So the distance between 0 and 6 is 2. So that is the concept of walk, trail, path, distance. That's it. Now, here we were discussing undirected graphs. In fact, undirected graphs are usually termed as graphs. If we simply say graph, we means direction is not associated with it. If direction is also associated, we call such graphs as directed graphs. What is the difference? From the usual graph, the only difference is that every edge is an ordered pair. For a graph, an edge was set UV, right? 2 elements U and V, the end vertices together form a set. In a set, there is no restriction in the ordering of the elements. That is, set UV is same as set VU. Here we are associating a direction means instead of sets, we are taking ordered pairs. When we consider ordered pair UV and ordered pair VU are different. So that gives, when set is replaced by an ordered pair, what we get is a directed graph. So when we draw such a directed graph, there will be an arrow mark indicating the direction of the edge. And from the example, you can see that there can be edges in both directions. Between say 1 and 4, you can see that there is an edge from 1 to 4 and 4 to 1. Okay. So such edges are called bi-directed edges. If there are edges in both directions between two vertices, we say that these two are bi-directed. And again, there can be loops also. Here you can see that an edge, a directed edge, starts from the vertex and ends on the same vertex itself. So that is also possible. Loops are also permitted in directed graphs over the particular direction. And when directions are removed, that is when ordered pairs are replaced with just say set UV, what you get is the underlying graph. And if you want underlying graph to be simple, the bidirectional edges are replaced by a single edge and loops are simply deleted. Then what we get is the underlying simple graph. So that is the relation between directed graphs and undirected graphs. So here are some directed graphs on 4 vertices. I just want to make sure that you are all with me. So here I have given 15 directed graphs on 4 vertices. As I have already shown you, there are only 11 graphs on 4 vertices, 7 undirected graphs on 4 vertices. Here we have more. Are they all? Or can someone give me a directed graph which is not listed in this? Or is it that there are only 15 directed graphs? Assume that the direction and all are visible to all of you. Can anyone give me one more directed graph on 4 vertices? Directed simple graph. I don't want bidirectional edges or loops. Is there anyone?
Ma'am, 11 number graph is there. If you change the direction of the arrows, then you get.
Change the direction. You are right. Ms. Smita, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, ma'am.
Yeah, that can be done for other graphs also, like graph in 2, 3.
In 2, if I just change the direction, that is again going to be isomorphic.
Isomorphism is there, right?
Isomorphic to the first one only.
Yes.
In 11, again in 11, if you change the direction of all the edges, what you are going to get is an isomorphism of 11 itself. But if you change the direction of only one edge, then you get a different orientation and different graph. Again, say on one edge, we can have only one. On 2 edges, we can have, this is one possibility.
3 and 5. 3.
A graph like just like looking arrow
Sorry,
type of graph.
I didn't get you.
One triangle and middle vertex is adjacent to remaining vertex.
Yes, that is possible. Such graph, one such graph is here, and we can have non-isomorphic copies of graph of that if we change the directions. Okay, so here direction also comes into picture. That's it. Okay. Again, here these two are isomorphic when the underlying simple graphs are considered. Here from this vertex we have 2 out edges, and here you have 2 in edges. The direction is towards that vertex. And if I make one in and the other out, that gives me a different orientation, which is given as the 13th graph. Okay. Again, you can have many more. This is not all. There are many more directed graphs on 4 vertices. I hope the concept of directed graph is clear. The underlying simple graph may be isomorphic.
Excuse me, ma'am. Can we put loops in these graphs?
Yeah, you are allowed to put loops and bidirectional edges to a directed graph, but my question was to give me simple directed graphs. In simple directed graphs, bidirectional edges and loops are not allowed.
Okay.
In directed graph, it is obviously permitted to have loops and bidirectional edges. That is possible. Okay. So shall we move ahead? Next, we move on to that is also directed graphs. We are coming back to our usual undirected graph. If I am considering a directed graph, I will specifically say that the graph under consideration is a directed graph. Unless otherwise specified, the graph is undirected. Okay. So another concept is that of intersection graph. Intersection graph means vertices will be a family of sets. Each vertex corresponds to a set. So the entire vertex set gives me a family of sets. and an adjacency or an edge is drawn between two vertices if the corresponding sets intersect. I hope the definition is clear. Each vertex is a set and two vertices are made adjacent to each other if the corresponding sets intersect, have a non-empty intersection. So that is the concept of intersection graph. So the obvious question is, can every graph be represented as an intersection graph, or is it that intersection graph forms a specific collection of graphs only? That is the obvious question, right? So let us try for some simple graphs. Here I have the drawing of C4. So my question is it possible to represent C4 as an intersection graph? Anyone want to give a try? Or maybe that I will give one, I will give the representation of C4 and ask, and I will give you another graph. Okay. So that you will have a better idea. So here is the intersection representation of C4. This vertex represents the set 1, 2. This is 2, 3. This is 3, 4. And this is 4, 1 or 1, 4. You can see that 1, 2 intersects with 2, 3 and 1, 4. So there are edges. And 1, 2 do not intersect with 3, 4. So there is no edge between the vertex 1, 2 and 3, 4. Similarly, 2, 3 and 1, 4 do not intersect. So there is no edge between them. And other edges you can just simply verify. In fact, the same idea can be used to represent any cycle Cn as an intersection graph. You start with any arbitrary vertex, or say V1 we will give, represent it using the set 1, 2, V2 will be 2, 3, V3 will be 3, 4, go on like that. Vn will be n and 1 or 1n. Okay, so that there will be an intersection between two adjacent, say for V1 and V2, 2 is the intersection, so we can draw an edge. For V2 and V3, 3 is the intersection, so we can draw an edge like that. Okay, so for every cycle, you can use the same idea to represent it as an intersection graph. But that doesn't mean that every graph can be represented as an intersection graph. We have obtained a representation for cycles as intersection graphs. Again, if we make a minute adjustment, we can get for paths, right? For the first set, instead of writing 1, 2, I can say simply write it as singleton 2. And the last one will be n. So that the last adjacency is lost. 1, 2 and 1, 4 are adjacent to each other. If I replace the first set by singleton 2, or if I replace the last set by singleton 4, the adjacency between the first and last vertex is lost, so that the cycle becomes a path. Okay, so every path can also be represented as intersection graphs. Again, the question comes back, is it true for every graph, or can every graph be represented as an intersection graph? So,
Ma'am,
yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you please explain me in the earlier slide,
Mhm.
what is the meaning of vertex 1, 2 or 1, 4? I'm not from graph theory, that is why I'm asking this.
Okay, the definition of intersection graph says each vertex is a set. Okay, every set is represented using a vertex. So this first vertex, this vertex is the representative of the set 1, 2. And the second vertex is a representative of the set 2, 3. Like that, I have given one set corresponding to each vertex. And two vertices are made adjacent to each other if the corresponding sets intersect. So here you have set 1, 2, and here you have set 2, 3. You take intersection. 2 is present as an element in the intersection. 2 is a common factor for both these two sets, right? So the intersection is non-empty, and hence there is an edge from 1, 2 to 2, 3. Now, if you consider this vertex and this one, the set corresponding to the first vertex is 1, 2, and the set corresponding to this vertex is 3, 4. Okay, you take intersection, it is empty. Since the intersection is empty, we can't draw an edge from this vertex 1, 2 to 3, 4. That is it. I hope
there-
now it is clear.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
clear.
Is there any restriction on cardinality of the set?
There is no restriction. The only thing is that I want to get C4 as an intersection graph. If you don't want 1, 2, 2, 3, etc., you can take A, B, B,
Yeah,
C,
so
like that, or you can
this-
take sets of higher cardinality.
Okay, so
Okay.
this representation is not unique.
Representation is not unique.
Okay.
Definitely not unique.
Okay.
Once you have a representation corresponding to a set of each vertex, you can add as many elements as you want, which are not in any other sets. The representation will not change
Thank
because the nature of intersection is still there. It's not disturbed. Okay. So the representation is not unique, but you can always look for a minimal representation. And in the case of C4, this is going to be the minimal one. Okay. So here you have the Peterson graph. Peterson graph is notorious among graph theorists because sometimes when we do research, we get an intuition, right? We get a feel that such and such statement is true. We get such a feeling. And we try to prove that. Maybe we are not able to find logical arguments to prove the statements, but we strongly feel that that statement is true. We keep on trying, that statement becomes an open problem and later it becomes a conjecture, right? But this Peterson graph is notorious because it contradicts most of the intuitions. That is, it serves as a counter example for many open problems. In that sense, Peterson graph is notorious among graph theorists. Okay. So we were checking whether all graphs are intersection graphs. So it is better to try for Peterson graph. If it fails for Peterson graph, then we can't say that all graphs can be represented as intersection graphs. Okay. So here you have Peterson graph. Can anyone suggest me a corresponding set representation which gives the intersection graph as Peterson graph? You can either specifically give me the sets corresponding to each vertices, or you can give me any idea. If you go like this, you may get it. Ideas are also welcome. Specific answers are most welcome and ideas are also welcome.
You can start first vertex with 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
And because degree is 3, so you can, next one you can put 1 common.
Okay.
For middle one 2 common, for right one 3 common. And then you
okay.
add another elements to left one is say 1 comma say 4, because 4 will be adjacent to inner one. And so in this manner you can complete it. Keep on
But
adding.
the thing is that if it is a cycle, we can just proceed like this and make sure that it will be completed. But when we randomly assign these values and move ahead, since there are interconnecting edges, can you be sure that two non-adjacent vertices do not have a non-empty intersection? Can you be sure?
Yes, because there is no restriction on number of elements in that set. So I will choose the elements which are not common, right? So
Okay.
I can put an
so
adding.
Is there a chance that we are giving say sets corresponding to each vertices? So is there a chance that when we are trying to give value to a particular vertex, say if I am trying to give a set corresponding to this particular vertex, this need to be adjacent with this one, and this one, right? This need to have 3 different neighbors.
Yes.
So this must intersect with the sets corresponding to these three vertices.
Yes.
So if we try to pick one from this set, one from this set, and one from this set, there is a chance that this is already adjacent to these two. So there is all possibility that it gets intersection with some other vertex also. But how can you be sure that that won't happen? Manish sir is 100% right. We just need to prove it. That's it. Okay, due to time constraint, I will move ahead. I'm sure that he can prove. If I give him, say, 2-3 minutes, he will prove.
Definitely.
Yeah. So here it is. This is the intersection graph representation of Peterson graph. So we have got a representation for Peterson graph, but does that mean that every graph can be represented as an intersection graph? Need not be, right? This is a famous, notorious counterexample person or a graph, but for this something is true doesn't mean that for every graph it is true. But in fact, for every graph it is true. And it can be proved in general also. The idea is that you label all the edges, say using say 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Let there be m edges. So all edges can be labeled using distinct numbers from 1, 2, 3, etc. m. And to a vertex, you assign a set which takes the labels of the edges which are incident to that particular vertex. Okay, so if I'm taking a labeling as say for the cycle, for this outer cycle, I will take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we have this sticks. I will label them as 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And there is a inner C5 in the shape of a star. For that, I will give 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. What I have done is I have just taken the labels of the edges which are incident on this vertex. So for this vertex, this edge was labeled 1, this was labeled 5, and this stick was labeled 6. So I have given set 1, 5, 6 for this vertex. If you do like this, then two sets will intersect only if there is an edge connecting them. And the intersection will contain that specific label of that edge. In that way, you can make it sure that intersection gives the presence of an edge. And if it is an empty intersection, that means there is no edge connecting these two. Okay. So in that way, you can prove that every graph admits an intersection representation, or every graph is an intersection graph. So that's all for, yes.
Yeah. So I just observed that in C4 you used 2 coordinates, 1,
Yes.
2, 1, 3,
Yes.
and here you used 3 coordinates.
Exactly.
Is it that because of the degree of each vertex is 2 and 3
Yes,
respectively?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Precisely. Here these two graphs, C4 was 2 regular. A graph is R regular if the degree of every vertex is R. Okay, so C4 is 2 regular and Peterson graph is 3 regular. That is why the cardinality of all sets were 2 in the case of C4 and 3 in the case of Peterson graph. And please notice that it is not necessary that the cardinality of all sets must be equal while taking intersection representation. It's not that. You can have sets of different cardinality to represent different vertices. I got this kind of, the cardinality of all sets were equal only because the graph under consideration was a regular graph. Again, it is not necessary that if it is a regular graph, we will get sets of equal cardinality. It is not like that. Say if I add a set, add an element 16 to this set, nothing will happen. The cardinality of that set changes to 4, but still the intersection graph representation remains the same. In an optimal representation, the number of elements in a set corresponding to a vertex will be equal to its degree. That is how we find an optimal representation. Optimal here means the cardinality of each set is minimal. That is the optimality condition here. I hope it is clear. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Madam, is it enough?
The number of sets should be at least the number of degree, madam.
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
Of
Yeah,
course,
at
yes.
least, yeah.
At least it must
At
be
least.
equal to, because we have
Number of-
I think no, it's not necessary. It depends. It's not equal to, say, if you are taking the complete graph, the
Okay.
degree of every vertex is n-1.
So singleton
Okay.
set is here. Okay.
Yeah, it's not necessary. I can take the
Okay.
same set for
For,
it. It's not
for
necessary.
complete graph only. Other than
Maybe
that,
it depends upon the independence number of the neighborhood of a vertex. The cardinality of a minimal possible cardinality of a vertex depends upon the independence number of the neighborhood. Maybe some
independent
connection.
number of the neighborhood. Okay.
Maybe such a
Okay.
relation is there.
Okay.
And if we make a restriction that all these sets must be distinct, then again we will go to the fact that it is equal to the number of edges incident on that vertex.
So can The number 15 comes there. There are 10 vertices. And the number 15 comes there. Like to construct the set, we had to move like from 1, 2, 3 up till 15. So 15 is the maximum number in an optimal solution. So is there an bound, like is the best bound or something kind of that thing?
There are some bounds. There are some bounds. And I think the optimal assignment is obtained. It has been proved that the optimal assignment is obtained by labeling the edges and using that to represent the set. That's a proved result. The optimal solution is obtained like that. So once we have the optimal solution, the precise optimal solution, there is no question of bound, right? And you can look for a bound when we are considering all graphs on n vertices. In that case, you can look for a bound. Okay. Okay. So that's all for the basics from graph theory. Regarding groups, I'm sure that since abstract algebra is a compulsory paper from our degree classes onwards, all of you will be familiar with that. We'll just brush up. We will just recall all those definitions. So what is a group? A group is precisely an ordered set, a set together with a binary operation star. So G must be a non-empty set and star must satisfy, it's a binary operation, so closure property is there. And it must satisfy 3 more properties, namely associativity, existence of identity, and existence of inverse. I'm not elaborating on these points. I assume that all of you will be familiar with that. And a group is called an abelian group if in addition to these 3 properties, star has commutativity. We call such groups as abelian groups or commutative groups if star satisfies commutative property. And again, like very much like graphs have subgraphs, here groups have subgroups. So a subset H of G is called a subgroup if H forms a group under the same operation defined on G. That operation is important. Sometimes I used to get questions from students, definitely not from faculty, but from students that say R under multiplication is a group and Z under addition is a group. So can we say that Z is a subgroup of R? Such questions. So make sure that the operation under consideration is also important. If star is the operation which we are considering on G, H star itself must be a group. So that is the idea of subgroup. Now, if star is the operation and X is an arbitrary element of the group, due to closure property, X star X must be present in G, again star X that must be present in G, again star X that must be present in G. So the element X star, etc., star X taken n times is denoted by X raised to n. And all integer powers of a particular element X forms a subgroup of G. To prove that something is a subgroup of G, we need not verify all group axioms. Once the elements of G satisfies associativity, any subset of it also satisfies associativity. So that property need not be checked. If identity element is present, we can prove that if closure property is there, the existence of inverse can be proved in the case of finite groups, and existence of inverse together with closure property gives us the identity element. So the key thing is the closure property. That is, it must be a binary operator in the set under consideration. And if we take the integer powers of a particular element, it is easy to verify that the closure property is satisfied. So the integer powers of an element forms a subgroup of G. Such subgroups are called cyclic subgroups. And if the group G itself can be generated using a single element X, that is G is the collection of all integer powers of a particular element X, we call group as that particular group as a cyclic group, and we call X as the generator of G. Okay, so the notation is X within angle brackets, which means G is a cyclic group generated by the element X. And one may notice that the generator of a group need not be unique, and there are characterizations for having unique generators. So that is cyclic groups. Now, generating sets of a group, we just told that if a single element X can generate the entire group, we call such groups as cyclic groups. So what if a single element cannot generate? Okay, you take one more and try all possible combinations with these two and the integer powers of them. If you get the entire group, well and good. Then the set of two elements is called a generating set of the group. So that's it. The definition of generating set of a group, a subset of a group such that every element of the group can be expressed as a combination of finitely many elements of the subset and its inverses. Then we say that the set S is a generating set. The subgroup generated by S is denoted by S within angle brackets. And this subgroup is having all these interesting properties. It is the smallest subgroup of G containing every element of S. It is the intersection taken over all subgroups which contains S as a subset. It is the subgroup of all elements of G that can be expressed as a finite product of elements and its inverses, which is the definition of the generator. And if you are considering a finite group, we need not think about the inverses. It automatically comes. Inverses need not be considered if the group is not infinite. Okay. Now, order of a group and order of an element. Order of a group is nothing but the number of elements present in the group G. And the order of an element A is the smallest positive integer n, such that A raised to n is equal to E. You take A star A, again star A, again star A. If the group is finite, at some stage, you must get the identity element E. And n is the smallest positive integer such that A raised to n is equal to E. If G is not a finite group, we need not get such a positive integer n. And in that case, we say that the order of that particular element is infinity. Again, the order of a group is the number of elements present in the group G if G is finite. And if G is of infinite cardinality, we say that the order of that particular group is infinite, or we are considering an infinite group in that case. So now we have graphs and its basic definitions, and we have groups. So let us try to make some association between graphs and groups. While introducing the basic concepts of graphs, I already introduced intersection graph. Okay. So the notion of intersection graphs can be used in groups to create a graph from a particular group. The idea is you have a group, you can find all subgroups of G. G itself is a subgroup. The identity element E as a singleton set is also a subgroup. These two subgroups are considered as the trivial subgroups, and there can be many more subgroups for G. You take all possible subgroups of G. These are the vertices of our graph. And two vertices are made adjacent to each other if they intersect. That is the definition. Okay, so let me ask you, do you find any hitch there? This is my definition. Then what happens for intersection graph?
Identity is always there.
Yes, exactly. You take any subgroup, definitely identity element E will be there. So their intersection will be obviously non-empty. So the intersection graph becomes a complete graph, and that is not interesting. Always getting a complete graph. What is there in it? So here, though we are defining intersection graph as intersection of subgroups, we are making an additional restriction. Two subgroups, two vertices corresponding to the subgroups H and K are made adjacent to each other if their intersection is something greater than the singleton set E. Identity element E will be definitely there. Okay, are there more elements? That is what we are interested in. So H intersection K must be a proper superset of singleton E. Only then we will make adjacency between H and K. Such a restriction is there only because of the fact that E will be present in all subgroups. And if we define like this, it will give only a trivial result. Always we will be getting complete graphs alone. Okay, so that is why we are making such a restriction. Another well-known class of graphs defined from groups is Cayley graphs. During the inaugural session, in the beginning of the session itself, Vinayak Joshi sir was mentioning about Cayley graphs. Algebraic graph theory, when we think of graphs associated with groups, the oldest and the famous One is the Cayley graph. We'll have the definition of it. It is an edge color directed graph. So something more from graph theory is required to explain that. And then we have the commuting graphs. We have the non-commuting graphs. We have deep commuting graphs. We have power graphs. We have enhanced power graph and many more. We'll be focusing on power graph, but I'll just go through the other classes of graphs also. Intersection graphs of subgroups I have already explained. The next one is Cayley graphs. Cayley graph means let G be a group and let S be a generating set of G. For defining intersection graph or say power graph, commuting graph and all, what we require is a group alone. But for Cayley graphs, we need group G and a particular generating set of S. As you all know, the generating set need not be unique. Okay, so you pick one generating set S and the group G is with us. The vertex set is the elements of the group G. So each element of a group corresponds to a vertex in the Cayley graph. And we need one more function also. To each element yes in yes, that is each element in the generating set, we are assigning a color to that particular element. Corresponding to yes, we have a color. I call it as CS. So CS is a color associated to the element yes in the generating set. Okay. Now, for every G in G and yes in yes, there is a directed edge from G to GS of color CS. Okay. You take an element G. There is a vertex corresponding to that element. Okay. So I have a vertex G here. And now I need to draw edges. As I already told, Cayley graph is a directed graph. So here the edges are having directions. So from G to which vertex? You take any arbitrary element from the generating set yes and find GS. GS will be another vertex, right? So from G to GS, I will draw an arc, a directed edge from G to GS. This is enough to define a directed graph. But in Cayley graph, we have something more. We are using a precise element S, right? Corresponding to S, we have a color CS. So for this directed edge, I am giving that color also. So here we are using the concept of coloring graphs. Coloring graphs means simply give colors. If you are giving colors to vertices, that coloring is called a vertex coloring. If you are giving colors to the edges, such colorings are called edge colorings. And if you want to color all the vertices and edges, okay, you can do that. Such colorings are called tail colorings. You give me a vertex coloring. That vertex coloring is said to be proper if no two adjacent vertices are given the same color. And depending upon that, we have a parameter called chromatic number, which we will be discussing tomorrow. In my next session, we will be discussing something about chromatic number if we get time. Okay. So that is the idea there. And again, edge coloring is proper if no two incident edges, no two adjacent edges receives the same color and like that. Okay. So here we are giving a colored edge, colored directed edge corresponding to each GS. Okay. So that is the concept of Cayley graph. And so many PhDs and thousands of papers are written based on the concept of Cayley graphs. Anyway, that is not my topic of interest today. And then comes commuting and non-commuting graphs. Coming to commuting graphs, the vertex set is again elements of the set G, the group G, and two vertices are made adjacent to each other if they commute with each other. Say X and Y are two elements of G. If XY equal to YX, then we draw an edge from X to Y. Okay, here there is no question of direction. If X commutes with Y, that means that Y commutes with X. So there is no question of giving a direction in the case of commuting graphs. It is an undirected graph and also simple. Now we know that the identity element D that commutes with all elements of the group. So in this commuting graph, the identity element E serves as a universal vertex. So what is a universal vertex? A vertex in a graph is called a universal vertex if it is adjacent to all other vertices of the graph. Okay, that is, if there are n vertices and the degree of a vertex is n-1, we say that that vertex is a universal vertex. In the case of identity element, we can see that identity element commute with all the elements of the group, and hence in the commuting graph, it will be adjacent to all the vertices. Sometimes we are not interested in that. Sometimes when we are finding the distance between two vertices or some notions like that comes into picture, when a universal vertex is there, the distance always becomes 2. And maybe we are interested in some other sort of relation between these two in which identity elements do not interfere. Yes? Okay, I think someone unmuted by mistake. Okay. So, there are cases where we consider commuting graphs in which the identity element E is deleted. E is not considered as a vertex. E will be deleted. Okay, so that is commuting graphs. And non-commuting graphs are precisely the complements of the commuting graph. That is, two vertices are made adjacent if the corresponding elements in the group do not commute with each other. That is the concept of non-commuting graphs. So when coming towards graph theory, this means one is the complement of the other. The complement I have already defined. Okay. Then comes the topic, the main topic of my lecture. I think someone's mic has been unmuted by mistake. It will be good if the organizers can mute that person.
So Krishna Ghode, who's Krishna Ghode? I think I can see his mic is not on mute. Krishna Ghode, please.
Now he has just muted, it seems. Okay, thank you for that. Otherwise, my voice may not be audible. That is why. Okay. So coming to power graph of a group. Again, the vertex set are precisely elements of G. And here, two vertices are made adjacent to each other if and only if one can be expressed as a power of the other. That is, X is adjacent to Y if either X is equal to Y raised to M or Y equal to X raised to M for some positive integer here. Okay, so that is the kind of adjacency which we are using. The graphs obtained from this group G are denoted by P of G, or now in a latest survey paper of Peter Cameron, the notation POW of G has been used. This becomes more clear, right? Power. When we say P or W, automatically the word power comes to our mind. So to avoid ambiguity, and you can see, if you just Google, you can see that in different papers, different authors are using different notations for power graphs. Someone has used G of G and someone has used P of G, like that. So in this survey paper, he's trying to bring a common standard notation for all sorts of graphs obtained from groups. And there you can see the notation as POW of G. But in many other papers, you can see the notation P of G also. Here during this lecture, I am using P of G just for convenience. It makes easy to type, right? POW means I have to type 3. I have to hit 3 keys. But if I write P of G, I need to hit only 1. So I'm using the notation P of G. But there is all chance that the notation POW of G becomes a universally accepted notation for power graph of a group. Okay. And if G is a finite group, then A raised to M is again equal to E for some positive integer M. If G is finite, and due to the closure property, as we have already seen, this M is the order of the element A that we have already discussed, right? It reaches E. So every element A will be adjacent to E. Please note that if the group is finite. In the case of commuting graph, the thing was that E is always a universal vertex. Here the case is different. If we are considering a finite graph, then E becomes a universal vertex. If you are not considering a finite graph, then no problem. E is not a universal vertex. And again, we are considering the special case, say P star G, where this universal vertex or the elements which commutes with all other vertices are not taken into account. Such graphs are there. We will come to that also. Okay. Anyway, here what I require is, if G is a finite graph, then again the identity element E serves as a universal vertex for the power graph of a group. Now, when I talked about commuting graphs, I told that it is not possible to associate any direction because X commutes with Y, if and only if Y commutes with S. Yes, but here the case is different. Here the adjacency in power graph was defined as X and Y are adjacent if one can be expressed as the power of other. So we have two possibilities. Either X is equal to Y raised to M is equal to X raised to M. Two different possibilities are there. Based on these possibilities, we can assign direction to the edges. The resultant graph is called directed power graph of the given group. Here the direction is the, say, ordered pair XY is an edge in the directed power graph. If X not equal to Y and Y is equal to X raised to M, Y can be expressed as a power of X. Then there is a directed edge from X to Y. Directed edge from X to Y means Y is a power of X. Okay. Of course, positive integer power. If we take the negative integer power, then Y equal to X raised to M implies X equal to Y raised to minus M, right? So here we specifically mentioned that the power considered is a positive integer. We are taking only positive powers. And to avoid loops, we are not considering the case where M equal to 1. So we can say that M is a natural number greater than 1. That is the case in the case of directed power graph of a group. So for power graphs, we have both directed version and undirected version. Now, as I told earlier, we need the concept of isomorphic graphs. And we have isomorphic groups also, right? Two graphs are said to be isomorphic if I can define a bijection from the vertex set of G to the vertex set of H such that this function preserves both adjacency and non-adjacency. Both are preserved. There are cases where adjacency is preserved but non-adjacency is not. Then we can't say that these two graphs are isomorphic. Isomorphism comes into picture only if both adjacency and non-adjacency is preserved. So here you have C5. I have taken two different drawings of C5. And if I label vertices in a nice manner so that I can define a bijection, you can see that this bijection preserves both adjacency and non-adjacency. Say I label this as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And when I come to this, I can label this vertex as 0. Then I will label this C as 1, this E as 2, this B as 3, this D as 4, and then comes back to 0. Okay. And that assignment defines a bijection which preserves both adjacency and non-adjacency. So these are two drawings of the same graph C5. And again, you have say 4 different drawings of this graph is called diamond. This is K4, the complete graph K4 minus a single edge. So this graph is also important in say it serves as a forbidden subgraph for many well-known classes of graphs. In that sense, this graph is important and this is termed as a diamond graph. This drawing gives you the feel of a diamond, right? That is why the name diamond graphs. And I have given 4 different drawings of K4 minus E. That doesn't mean that these are the only drawings. Okay, you can have infinitely many different types of drawings for a particular graph, because even a single edge can be drawn in infinitely many different ways. It's not necessary that an edge is a straight line. You can have a curve. And between two curves, you can, between 2 points, you can draw as many curves as you want. And each drawing gives you an isomorphic copy of the same graph. Okay, so the drawings are not unique. In fact, for a single graph, you can have infinitely many different drawings. But if such a relation is maintained, that is both the adjacency and non-adjacency is maintained, those two graphs are isomorphic for us. And isomorphism is there for groups also. In graphs, it was a bijection defined from the vertex set of the first graph to the second graph. And for groups, the bijection is defined on the underlying set. So F is a bijection from G to H such that F preserves all group operations. For graphs, what need to be preserved was adjacency and non-adjacency. For group, we need all group operations to be preserved. Okay. So that is isomorphism of groups. Now, every cyclic group of a given order are isomorphic. That we know there is only one group, one cyclic group of order n up to isomorphism. And every infinite cyclic group is isomorphic to integers, to the group of integers under addition. These are all non-facts. I just wrote that in the slide. That's it. Okay. Now, again, coming back to power graph of a group. If we start with two isomorphic groups, that is, if G1 and G2 are two isomorphic groups, then obviously their power graphs will be isomorphic. Elements, the cardinality is same, so the vertex set are the same. And since group properties are preserved, for power graphs, we are using the property A adjacent to A raised to n, right? That is also preserved. That is a group property, and that will be preserved when we shift from G1 to G2. So if the starting groups G1 and G2 are isomorphic, then the corresponding power graphs will definitely be isomorphic. So the next question is, what about the converse? If starting groups are isomorphic, power graphs are isomorphic. Okay. So if power graphs are isomorphic, can we say that the starting groups are isomorphic? Which is not true in general. The converse question, that is PG1 isomorphic to PG2, doesn't imply that the corresponding groups are isomorphic. Power graphs are isomorphic, doesn't in general imply that the corresponding groups are isomorphic. Okay. Say for example, let G be a finite group of exponent 3. Exponent 3 means x raised to 3 is equal to 1, where 1 stands for the identity element. X raised to 3 is equal to 1 for every x element of G. So you take a finite group of exponent 3. What will be the power graph? The power graph will be the friendship graph. Then what is this friendship graph? Friendship graph means it's a set of triangles. Triangle is okay, right? 3 vertices, all of them made adjacent to each other. So it's a collection of triangles, all of which shares a common vertex. One vertex is common to all those triangles. So here you have the drawing. These are friendship graphs of order 2, 3, and 4. Okay. So here you have the friendship graphs. For exponent, finite groups having exponent 3, the power graph will be the friendship graph. Why? You take x, x will be adjacent to x, x squared, and x cube, which is equal to 1. Okay. This is true for every element x. So each element x gives me a triangle. And x square is again an element y. If you consider it as a different element, then again y square, y cube is again y square will be x itself. Okay. So the same triangle will be repeated. That's it. And identity element is E is the common vertex for all those triangles. So that's it. It is the power graph of a finite group of exponent 3 is the friendship graph. And the order of the friendship graph or the number of triangles in the friendship graph will be equal to mod G minus 1 divided by 2. This minus 1 stands for the identity element. Identity element is removed. All other elements can be clubbed as x square. Okay. So that's the idea. The power graph is the friendship graph, which contains mod G minus 1 by 2 triangles. What's the problem? It's okay. The graph is friendship graph. Friendship graphs of different order are different. Okay. But the thing is that there are abelian and non-abelian groups with exponent 3. We can have examples of groups, abelian groups having exponent 3. 1 omega square itself serves. And we can have examples of non-abelian groups which also has exponent 3. Okay. And we know that an abelian group can never be isomorphic to a non-abelian group. But if the order of this abelian group and non-abelian group are equal, then the corresponding power graph is also having mod G minus 1 by 2 triangles, which gives me 2 isomorphic copies of friendship graphs. So it is possible that the power graphs are isomorphic, but the corresponding groups are not isomorphic. In general, it is not true. Okay, So here we are getting counter examples from one from abelian and one from non-abelian. Okay, then we will do one thing. We will restrict ourselves to abelian groups. Then will it be true? That is, we are considering two abelian groups, G1 and G2, and we got that the power graph of G1 and G2 are isomorphic. Is it true that G1 and G2 are isomorphic? That is our next question. Again, it is not true. For infinite abelian groups, here you have a class of graphs, say QP by Z, where QP represents the collection of the group of all rational numbers whose denominator is a power of P. Okay, so QP denotes the group of all rational numbers whose denominator is a power of P. And you take the quotient group with respect to Z. P of G, that is power graph of G, is a countably infinite complete graph. Okay. Again, when I told about graphs, I didn't mention about infinite. If either the vertex set or edge set is infinite, we call such graphs as infinite graphs. Okay. Edge set is infinite, obviously forces us to be to the vertex, forces us that the vertex set is also infinite. But the converse need not be true. There can be infinitely many vertices and no edges at all. That is also possible. Anyway, either the edge set or at least the vertex set is infinite, then such graphs are called infinite graphs. If we are taking a group with infinite cardinality, the underlying set has cardinality infinity, then obviously the graph also becomes an infinite graph. That is not a problem for us. Again, QP by Z. QP contains, this contains infinitely many elements, so the graph is infinite. And it is a complete graph also. Okay. So it is always going to be a complete graph of complete graph. And for different values of P, we get non-isomorphic QP by Z. If P is different, say QP by Z and QQ by Z are non-isomorphic if P not equal to Q. But the underlying graph is infinite complete graph. That does not depend upon the value of P. It is an infinite complete graph. So the power graph will be isomorphic. If we take different prime numbers P, the power graph will be isomorphic, but the underlying groups are non-isomorphic. So even if we restrict ourselves to infinite abelian groups, it is not true that the power graphs are isomorphic implies the underlying groups are isomorphic. Now what we will do? Okay, let us restrict ourselves to finite abelian groups and check what happens. Luckily, here, such a relation is there. That is, if we are considering two finite abelian groups, G1 and G2, such that their power graphs are isomorphic, then the underlying groups G1 and G2 are isomorphic. So in such cases, to study group properties, we can use the power graphs. And to study graph theoretic properties, we can use the underlying groups. This is a place where power graphs plays an important role. Here I have given an idea of the proof. Say, let X and Y be two elements of G. Then X and Y have the same closed neighborhood in P of G, if and only if one of these conditions hold. This is the idea of the proof. This is the first lemma that is proved to prove this theorem. Okay. So having same closed neighborhood of if and only if either the cyclic group generated by X is equal to the cyclic group generated by Y, or G is cyclic and one of X and Y is a generator of G. It is not necessary that both are generators. If both are generators, then first condition itself holds, right? Cyclic group of X is equal to cyclic group of Y holds. So if G is cyclic, it is not necessary that X group generated by X equal to group generated by Y. It is only necessary that one of them is a generator of G. Then the closed neighborhood is same. And again, if G is cyclic of prime power order, X and Y can be arbitrary. Even then, they have the same closed neighborhood. Okay. Again, I am using the term closed neighborhood, same closed neighborhood. The neighborhood of a vertex means the collection of all vertices which are adjacent to you. You take a vertex U and take all vertices which are adjacent to you. That gives you the neighborhood of U. This neighborhood is open neighborhood, And if we include the vertex U also, what you get is a closed neighborhood. So closed neighborhood is nothing but the vertex and all its neighbors. And two vertices have same closed neighborhood, means closed neighborhood of U is equal to, it is a set, right? So the closed neighborhood of U is equal to the closed neighborhood of B. So this happens if and only if any of these following conditions hold. Okay. And using that, and using that, we are proving this theorem. I'm not going into the complete details of the proof. It is out of scope. For those who are interested, I'll share that research paper which contains the proof. Pg1 isomorphic to Pg2, if and only if G1 isomorphic to G2, where G1 and G2 are finite abelian groups. Okay. Then comes automorphism group of a group. Okay. I have written, usually when we study group theory, we write only automorphism group, right? No need to write automorphism group of a group. I have written it like this because here we have automorphism group of group and automorphism group of graph also. Just to distinct them, I have written automorphism group of a group. For group, it will be, all of you will be familiar with that, right? An automorphism is an isomorphism of a group onto itself, and the collection of all automorphisms under composition, dealt as a function under composition, is a group, and that group is called the automorphism group of G. This concept all of you will be knowing. Related to that, we have automorphism group of a graph. Please note the slide has changed. Okay. So what is automorphism group of a graph? Again, graph isomorphism we have already defined. An isomorphism of a graph onto itself is called an automorphism. Collection of all automorphisms. Say in the case of graphs, isomorphisms are all automorphisms. That is it. Okay. Collection of all automorphisms under composition is again a group, and that group is called automorphism group of the graph G. So you are starting with a graph G. You are taking all sorts of automorphisms in that graph. That graphs, we take labeled graphs for convenience, and you take composition of two automorphisms. Again, that results in an automorphism of the same graph. So in that direction, you can define a group called automorphism group of a graph. So another question is regarding power, regarding isomorphism of power graphs, we have already seen. And what about automorphism group of G and automorphism group of power graph of G? So G is a group, we have automorphism group of G. Power graph of G is a graph, and we have automorphism group of a graph. Automorphism group of a graph. Okay. First one is automorphism group of a group, and second one is automorphism group of a graph.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question that in the previous slide you said automorphism group of a graph.
Yes.
So that means that you want functions from G to G which
Yes.
preserves graph structure as well as group structure. Is it?
When we are
Or just a
considering
group structure?
automorphism of a graph, that means graph structure alone. Automorphism of a graph means we are considering graph structures alone. So each automorphism is a function. And then we are taking the collection of all those functions and applying the operation of composition to get a group. While considering automorphism of a graph, group does not play any role there.
Okay, so it may or may not be group also. That graph may or may not be group.
Yeah, group is
Right.
not having any role there. It may or may not be a group.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So aught G denotes the automorphism group of the group G, and aught P of G denotes the automorphism group of the corresponding power graph. Okay. It's too trivial that aught G is a subgroup of aught P of G. The question is when they will be equal. This is not an open problem. This has already been settled. It was open for some time, but now it is being settled. For that, we need our very famous Klein-4 group. Again, all of you will be familiar. We'll just recall the definition. We have only two non-isomorphic graphs, groups of order 4, say Z4 and Klein-4 group. Klein-4 group is a group of order 4, such that every element is an inverse of itself. And there are only two non-isomorphic groups of order 4. All of you will be familiar with that. Consider this Klein-4 group. The only finite group G for which automorphism group is equal to or isomorphic to the automorphism group of power graph of G is the Klein-4 group. This problem has already been settled. The idea of the proof is X going to X inverse is an automorphism of P of G, right? In the power graph, X going to X inverse, that gives me an automorphism. Now, X going to X inverse is an automorphism of G if and only if G is abelian. When we consider the corresponding group, X going to X inverse in power graph of G was the first one which I mentioned, and that is an automorphism there. But when we come to X going to X inverse in the underlying group, it will be an automorphism if and only if G is abelian. Okay, so to have odd G equal to odd P of G, G must be abelian. Now, if order of X is greater than 2 and order of Y divides order of X, implies automorphism fixing X and Y and which maps XY towards inverse is an automorphism in power graph of G. But it cannot be a group automorphism. So G is not cyclic. From that, we conclude that G is not cyclic. Okay, so G is abelian, G is not cyclic. Again, then it has been proved that if order of G is not a composite number greater than 4, then the order of G must be a power of 2. And then finally, the proof says that that power must be 2. That value of A must be 2. So now we have reached a group, an abelian group of order 4, which is not cyclic. The only possibility is the Klein-4 group. That is how the proof works. So the only finite group G for which automorphism group of G is equal to the automorphism group of power graph of G is the Klein-4 group. Now, the next thing is order of elements. We have already reached 1-7. So I think better I will stop here for today and we'll continue tomorrow. I thought of covering this order of element and some relation. With that, no problem. We can continue with that tomorrow. Otherwise, it will be a bit too much. So I will quickly move to thank you. And any questions? I think we have interacted in between itself.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Aparna. There are questions participants can ask.
In fact, there are plenty more to explore on power graphs. I have just introduced the concept of power graphs and only one point, that is regarding the automorphism group. That point we have discussed. Related to power graph, it is a recent concept. It's not an old concept, but still there are a handful of papers written in power graphs and so many open problems are there relating power graphs. Graphs are having so many parameters, and which all parameters play a role in the corresponding group, in the study of group, which parameters are interesting. And the parametrical values of power graph, different graph theoretical parameters of power graphs are interesting. When power graphs belongs, when do these power graphs belongs to a particular class of graphs, say co-graphs, planar graphs, perfect graphs, when do they become such and such thing? In fact, power graphs are always perfect like that. So many things are there that we will discuss tomorrow.
For a given graph, automorphism graph group is unique or not?
For a given graph, the automorphism group is unique. Yeah, it is unique.
Okay, thank you.
Once G is fixed, it is. That is, we are taking all automorphisms of G, which cannot change. Once G is fixed, the automorphisms cannot change. Once automorphisms are fixed, the adjacencies cannot change. So it is fixed.
In one of the slide, you said that if the group is QP divided by Z, That is that p-adic group. Am I correct? P-adic group.
Yes. Yes, it is.
So you said that power graph.
We have the notation
of
P
G
infinity
gives
for that.
countably infinite complete graph.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. So my question is it known what is the power graph of p-adic numbers, p-adic rational numbers, or QP or ZP?
Yeah, I think that is already available in literature. I can't say offhand, but for different group structures, the power graphs has been studied. So such and such graphs are power graphs of such and such groups. Such a literature is there. I don't exactly remember for which group structures this has been studied, but for PID, I think there already exists a result regarding power graph of a PID group.
Okay, thank you.
Hello.
Yes.
Madam, in one example, you take one graph and take its all you take firstly one group and take its subgroup. But,
Okay.
and if two subgroups are that means if they are disjoint. If any one element is common between them.
They are made adjacent if they are not disjoint.
But
and we have an additional. Yes.
But if we take some elements, that means if we take element in G and its inverse, then they generate the same subgroup. So
yes.
If we consider they different or if same in this context.
When you take subgroups, you should take two different subgroups. So H1 and H2 are two different, not with the same elements, with the different elements. And if in the intersection, definitely E will be present. If there is something more, then we make adjacency. That is the concept of it, intersection graph.
Okay, so if that means both are the distinct.
Both are the
distinct graph. You say distinct subgroups.
Yes, distinct subsets are taken. Distinct subgroups are taken, which means the subsets will also be distinct.
And in one counter example, say that if finite abelian group have every element of order 3, then this one is the counter example for automorph in some context. But I don't know what is the finite example. Finite abelian group have every element of order 3.
Finite abelian group
having every element of order 3. Which one is example?